Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen had seen his fair share of military bases, but Fort Braxton felt different the moment he stepped off the transport truck. The North Carolina heat hit him like a wall, even though it was barely past dawn. Sweat already beaded on his forehead as he shouldered his duffel bag and looked around at what would be his home for the next 2 years. The base sprawled across hundreds of acres, with neat rows of barracks, training facilities, and administrative buildings stretching toward the horizon. Everything looked exactly as he expected from a major Army installation. Clean, organized, and buzzing with activity even at this early hour. Marcus had earned his transfer to Fort Braxton through 8 years of solid service and exemplary performance evaluations. His specialty in logistics coordination had made him valuable at every posting, but this assignment promised something more. The 82nd Airborne Division had a reputation that preceded itself, and being selected for their support operations meant his career was heading in the right direction. As he walked toward the processing center, Marcus passed groups of soldiers heading to morning PT. Their synchronized movements and sharp uniforms reminded him why he loved military life. Everything had its place, everyone knew their role, and the chain of command provided structure that made sense of even the most chaotic situations. The processing center hummed with quiet efficiency. A young private behind the desk handed Marcus his temporary quarters assignment and a thick packet of base information. Room 247 in Building C would be his home until permanent housing opened up. The private also gave him directions to the 3rd Brigade Combat Team headquarters, where he would report for duty at 0800 hours. Marcus found his room easily enough. The building was standard military housing, with long corridors lined with numbered doors. His room was small but functional, containing everything he needed: a single bed, a desk, a wardrobe, and a small refrigerator. He unpacked quickly, hanging his uniforms with military precision and arranging his personal items according to regulations. With an hour before his first official meeting, Marcus decided to explore the base. He walked past the dining facility, where early risers were already grabbing breakfast. The commissary stood nearby, along with a small exchange store and a barber shop. Everything a soldier might need was within walking distance. The training areas impressed him most. Obstacle courses, shooting ranges, and mock combat zones covered acres of carefully maintained ground. Soldiers moved through various exercises under the watchful eyes of drill instructors whose voices carried clearly across the morning air. This was where America's finest honed their skills, and Marcus felt proud to be part of it. At exactly 0800 hours, Marcus presented himself at the 3rd Brigade Combat Team headquarters. The building was larger than most on base, with multiple floors and constantly flowing foot traffic. Inside, the walls displayed unit histories, commendations, and photographs of soldiers who had served with distinction. A sergeant at the front desk directed Marcus to the 2nd floor, where he would meet with his new commanding officer. The elevator was small and cramped, filled with other soldiers going about their daily business. Marcus straightened his uniform one final time before stepping off at the 2nd floor. The hallway was lined with offices, each marked with nameplates and rank insignia. Marcus found the office he was looking for and knocked twice on the doorframe. A voice from inside called for him to enter. Behind the desk sat a colonel Marcus had never met before. The man was in his 50s, with graying hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent decades in military service. His uniform was immaculate, and his desk was organized with the precision Marcus expected from a senior officer. "Staff Sergeant Chen reporting for duty, sir," Marcus said, snapping to attention and delivering a crisp salute. The colonel returned the salute and gestured for Marcus to take a seat. "Welcome to Fort Braxton, Sergeant. I'm Colonel Harrison, and I'll be overseeing your integration into our operations here. I've reviewed your service record, and I'm impressed with what I see." Marcus felt a surge of pride at the compliment. "Thank you, sir. I'm ready to contribute to the mission in whatever capacity is needed." Colonel Harrison opened a file on his desk and flipped through several pages. "Your logistics background is exactly what we need right now. We're implementing new supply chain protocols, and your experience with coordination systems makes you perfect for this assignment. The colonel explained that Marcus would be working with multiple units across the base, ensuring that equipment, supplies, and personnel moved efficiently through various training and operational scenarios. It was challenging work that required attention to detail and the ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. You'll be working closely with other senior non-commissioned officers, Colonel Harrison continued. This base operates on teamwork, and everyone needs to understand their role in the larger mission. I expect you to maintain the same level of excellence that brought you here. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely, sir. I understand the importance of coordination in military operations, and I'm committed to upholding the standards of the 82nd Airborne. The colonel closed the file and leaned back in his chair. Good. Your first assignment will be working with our Training Coordination Office. They'll brief you on current operations and help you understand how everything fits together. Report there at 1,400 hours today. After the meeting, Marcus had several hours to familiarize himself with the base layout and grab lunch at the dining facility. The food was typical military fare, but it was well prepared and filling. He sat with other soldiers, listening to conversations about upcoming training exercises and deployment schedules. The atmosphere at Fort Braxton was different from his previous assignments. There was an intensity here, a sense of purpose that went beyond routine military operations. These soldiers were preparing for real-world missions that could happen at any time, and that urgency influenced everything they did. Marcus spent the afternoon walking around different areas of the base, getting a feel for the daily rhythm of operations. Soldiers moved with purpose between buildings, vehicles came and went from motor pools, and training exercises continued in various outdoor areas. Everything was coordinated and efficient, but there was also a sense of barely contained energy, as if everyone was ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. The Training Coordination Office was located in a building near the main administrative complex. When Marcus arrived at 1,400 hours, he was greeted by a staff sergeant who introduced himself as Rodriguez. The man had a friendly demeanor but carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew his job inside and out. "Welcome to the Coordination Center," Rodriguez said, leading Marcus through a series of connected offices. "This is where we make sure everything runs smoothly. Training schedules, equipment allocation, personnel assignments, it all flows through here." The office space was filled with computers, communication equipment, and large wall-mounted displays showing various training schedules and unit locations. Several soldiers worked at different stations, monitoring radio communications and updating electronic databases. Rodriguez explained the daily routine. Morning briefings covered the previous day's activities and outlined plans for the current day. Throughout the day, coordinators tracked training exercises, managed equipment requests, and ensured that all units had what they needed to complete their missions. "The key to success here is anticipation," Rodriguez explained. "We don't wait for problems to happen. We identify potential issues before they become actual problems, and we have solutions ready before anyone even knows they need them." Marcus spent the rest of the afternoon learning about the various computer systems and communication protocols used in the coordination office. The technology was more advanced than what he had worked with at previous assignments, but the underlying principles were the same. Organization, communication, and attention to detail were the foundations of effective logistics coordination. As the day ended, Marcus felt confident about his new assignment. The work was challenging but aligned perfectly with his skills and experience. The people he had met seemed professional and dedicated, and the base itself impressed him with its efficiency and focus. Walking back to his quarters as the sun began to set, Marcus reflected on how much his military career had evolved since his first enlistment 8 years ago. He had started as a young soldier with little direction, but military service had given him purpose and taught him valuable skills. Now he was a senior non-commissioned officer with real responsibilities and the respect of his peers. The evening air was cooler than the morning heat, but still warm enough to remind him that summer was approaching. Other soldiers were heading to the dining facility for dinner, and Marcus decided to join them. The conversations he overheard were about upcoming training exercises, weekend plans, and the usual topics that occupied military personnel during downtime. After dinner, Marcus returned to his room and began preparing for the next day. He laid out his uniform, organized his paperwork, and reviewed the materials Rodriguez had given him about base operations. Everything needed to be perfect, because in military service, attention to detail could mean the difference between success and failure. As he prepared for bed, Marcus thought about the path that had brought him to Fort Braxton. 8 years of service in various locations, working with different units and learning from experienced leaders, had prepared him for this opportunity. The 82nd Airborne represented the pinnacle of Army excellence, and being part of their support operations was both an honor and a responsibility. The base grew quieter as evening turned to night, but Marcus knew that activity never completely stopped at a place like Fort Braxton. Guards walked their posts, duty personnel monitored communications, and, somewhere in the distance, training exercises continued under artificial lighting. The military never truly slept, because readiness required constant vigilance. Marcus settled into his small bed and closed his eyes, listening to the distant sounds of base operations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove himself worthy of his assignment. He was ready for whatever came next, confident in his abilities and committed to upholding the standards that had brought him this far in his military career. The last thing he thought about before falling asleep was how much he was looking forward to meeting the rest of the team he would be working with. Effective coordination required strong working relationships, and Marcus prided himself on being able to work well with anyone. He had no idea that one of those working relationships would challenge everything he thought he knew about military hierarchy and his own assumptions about leadership. Marcus arrived at the coordination office early the next morning, determined to make a strong first impression on his new team. The building was already buzzing with activity when he walked through the doors at 0630 hours, 30 minutes before his official start time. Early arrival had always been one of his habits, a way to demonstrate commitment and professionalism. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was already at his desk, reviewing overnight reports and preparing for the morning briefing. He looked up when Marcus entered and nodded approvingly at his early arrival. "Good to see someone who takes initiative," Rodriguez said, gesturing toward an empty desk. "That'll be your workstation. Coffee's in the break room if you need it, and the morning briefing starts at 0700. Marcus set up his workspace quickly, arranging his supplies and logging into the computer systems he had learned about the previous day. The coordination office was larger than it had seemed during his initial tour, with multiple sections handling different aspects of base operations. His desk was positioned where he could see the main status boards and monitor radio communications. Other team members began arriving over the next 20 minutes. Marcus made it a point to introduce himself to each person, learning their names and roles within the coordination structure. Most were experienced non-commissioned officers like himself, with years of military service and specialized knowledge in logistics, communications, or training coordination. At exactly 0700 hours, the morning briefing began. Rodriguez stood at the front of the room next to a large display screen showing base maps, training schedules, and equipment status reports. The briefing followed a structured format, covering overnight activities, current day priorities, and potential issues that needed attention. "Today we have 3 major training exercises running simultaneously," Rodriguez explained, pointing to different areas on the base map. Alpha Company is conducting urban warfare training in the Mock City complex. Bravo Company has live fire exercises scheduled at Range 7. And Charlie Company is running airborne insertion drills at Drop Zone Delta. Marcus listened carefully as Rodriguez outlined the coordination requirements for each exercise. Equipment needed to be positioned at specific locations, communication links had to be maintained between different areas, and medical support teams needed to be ready for any emergencies that might arise. "Our job is to make sure everything flows smoothly," Rodriguez continued. "These soldiers are training for real-world missions, and any problems on our end could compromise their preparation. We don't get second chances when it comes to readiness." After the briefing, Rodriguez assigned Marcus to work with the equipment coordination section. His first task was to verify that all necessary supplies had been delivered to the various training sites and that backup equipment was available if needed. It was detailed work that required constant communication with different units across the base. Marcus threw himself into the assignment with characteristic enthusiasm. He contacted supply sergeants at each training site, confirmed delivery schedules with transportation units, and updated status reports in the computer system. The work was familiar to him, similar to logistics coordination he had done at previous assignments, but the scale and complexity were greater than anything he had experienced before. Around 1030 hours, Marcus was reviewing equipment lists when he noticed a potential problem. The urban warfare training exercise required specific communication equipment that appeared to be allocated to 2 different locations simultaneously. According to the computer system, the same radio units were supposed to be at both the Mock City complex and the live fire range. Marcus double-checked the records and confirmed the conflict. This was exactly the kind of problem Rodriguez had warned about, where small coordination errors could disrupt training and compromise mission readiness. He needed to resolve the issue quickly before it affected ongoing exercises. He reached for the radio to contact the supply depot when he heard someone approaching his desk. Looking up, he saw a soldier he hadn't met before. She was wearing standard battle dress uniform with no visible rank insignia, and she carried herself with the confident bearing of an experienced military professional. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clear and professional. "I'm looking for whoever is coordinating equipment for the urban warfare exercise. We're missing some communication gear that was supposed to be delivered this morning." Marcus stood up and extended his hand. "Staff Sergeant Chen. I'm handling equipment coordination today, and I think I've found the problem. It looks like there was a double allocation of radio equipment. Let me get this sorted out for you." The soldier shook his hand with a firm grip. "Thanks. We're supposed to start the next phase of training at 1100, and we can't proceed without proper communications. Is there a way to get replacement equipment delivered quickly?" Marcus was already pulling up supply depot contact information on his computer. "Absolutely. I can have backup radios delivered within the next 20 minutes. Can you give me your unit designation and the specific equipment requirements?" She rattled off a list of technical specifications with the fluency of someone who knew communication equipment inside and out. Marcus was impressed by her knowledge and attention to detail. Many soldiers he had worked with could operate military communications gear effectively, but few understood the technical requirements at this level. "No problem," Marcus said, reaching for the radio. "I'll contact Supply Depot Charlie and have them prioritize delivery to your location. They should have everything you need in their emergency inventory." As Marcus made the radio call, he found himself stealing glances at the soldier standing beside his desk. She was probably in her late 20s, with short brown hair and intelligent eyes that suggested someone who didn't miss much. Her uniform was immaculate, and she carried herself with an authority that seemed natural rather than forced. The supply depot confirmed that replacement equipment was available and would be delivered to the Mock City complex within 20 minutes. Marcus provided them with detailed specifications and emphasized the urgency of the request. "All set," he told her after ending the radio call. "Sergeant Williams from the supply depot will personally deliver the equipment to your training site. He'll need someone to sign for it, and he'll want to verify the serial numbers on the defective radios you're replacing." She nodded approvingly. "Perfect. I'll make sure someone is there to receive the delivery. Thanks for handling this so quickly. A lot of people would have made us wait while they went through official channels." Marcus felt pleased with the compliment. "That's what we're here for. The coordination office exists to solve problems before they disrupt training. Is there anything else you need while you're here?" "Actually, yes," she said, pulling a small notebook from her pocket. "I wanted to discuss communication protocols for tomorrow's joint exercise. We'll be working with units from different brigades, and I want to make sure everyone is using compatible equipment and procedures." Marcus pulled up the exercise schedule on his computer. Tomorrow's training was indeed complex, involving multiple units and different types of communication systems. Coordinating that many variables required careful planning and attention to detail. "This is pretty involved," Marcus said, studying the computer screen. "We'll need to make sure all the radio frequencies are coordinated, that everyone has the same encryption codes, and that backup communication methods are available if primary systems fail. She leaned over slightly to look at his computer screen, and Marcus caught a subtle scent of military issue soap mixed with something that might have been her shampoo. It was a reminder that beneath the professional military bearing, she was still a person with a life beyond the uniform. Exactly, she said, pointing to specific items on the screen. And we need to consider weather contingencies. If tomorrow's thunderstorms materialize as predicted, some of our standard communication procedures might not work effectively. Marcus was impressed by her forward thinking. Many soldiers focused only on immediate requirements, but she was already anticipating potential problems and thinking through solutions. It suggested someone with significant experience and natural leadership abilities. I can prepare alternative communication plans, Marcus offered. We have weather-resistant equipment available, and I can make sure backup systems are positioned at strategic locations around the training area. They spent the next 15 minutes going through various contingency scenarios, discussing equipment requirements and coordination procedures. Marcus found himself enjoying the conversation. She asked intelligent questions and offered practical suggestions based on her field experience. You really know your stuff, Marcus said as they wrapped up their planning session. How long have you been working with communication systems? She smiled slightly. A few years. You pick things up when you're responsible for making sure everyone can talk to each other during exercises. Communications failures can turn successful training into dangerous situations pretty quickly. Marcus nodded in agreement. He had seen training exercises go wrong when communication systems failed, and the results could range from minor inconvenience to serious safety hazards. Having someone who understood these systems was invaluable. Well, I think we've got everything covered for tomorrow, Marcus said, making final notes in the coordination system. I'll make sure all the equipment is positioned correctly, and I'll verify that backup systems are ready if we need them. Thanks again, she said, closing her notebook and preparing to leave. It's nice to work with someone who takes these details seriously. A lot of people don't realize how much coordination goes into making training exercises look effortless. As she turned to leave, Marcus realized he hadn't gotten her name. Hey, I didn't catch your name. In case I need to contact you about tomorrow's exercise. She paused at the edge of his desk. Peterson. And you can reach me through the Brigade Communication Center if anything comes up. Marcus watched her walk away, noting the confident stride and the way other soldiers in the coordination office nodded respectfully as she passed. There was something about her bearing that suggested someone accustomed to leadership responsibilities, though her lack of visible rank insignia made it difficult to determine her exact position in the military hierarchy. Rodriguez appeared at Marcus's desk a few minutes later, carrying a cup of coffee and looking pleased. I heard you handled that communication equipment problem pretty efficiently. Peterson seemed satisfied with your response. She knows her business, Marcus replied. Is she one of our regular contacts for communication issues? Rodriguez nodded. She works closely with the coordination office on complex exercises. Very professional, very competent. The kind of person you want to have good working relationships with around here. Marcus filed that information away for future reference. Building strong working relationships with key personnel was essential for effective coordination, and Peterson clearly fell into that category. The rest of the morning passed quickly as Marcus dealt with various coordination issues. Equipment deliveries, schedule adjustments, and communication checks kept him busy until the lunch break. He was settling into the rhythm of the job and finding that his previous experience translated well to the more complex operations at Fort Braxton. During lunch, Marcus sat with several other soldiers from the coordination office. The conversation naturally turned to the afternoon's training exercises and the challenges involved in supporting multiple simultaneous operations. The key is staying ahead of potential problems, said Sergeant Martinez, who handled transportation coordination. You can't wait for someone to tell you there's a problem. By then, it's usually too late to fix it without disrupting training. Marcus thought about his morning interaction with Peterson and how the equipment conflict could have disrupted the urban warfare exercise if it hadn't been caught early. Anticipating problems and having solutions ready was clearly a crucial skill in this environment. "What about the people you work with regularly?" Marcus asked. "Are there particular contacts who are especially helpful when you're trying to coordinate complex operations?" Several names came up in the discussion, and Marcus made mental notes about key personnel he should get to know better. Peterson's name was mentioned by multiple people as someone who was particularly effective at communication coordination and liaison work. "She's got a good reputation around here," Sergeant Martinez said. "Professional, reliable, knows her stuff. The kind of person who makes your job easier rather than harder." After lunch, Marcus returned to his desk to prepare for the afternoon's activities. The urban warfare exercise was progressing smoothly with the replacement communication equipment, and the live fire exercises were running on schedule. Tomorrow's joint exercise would be more complex, but the planning session with Peterson had given him confidence that the coordination requirements were manageable. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself thinking about his conversation with Peterson. There had been something impressive about her professionalism and competence, but also something that intrigued him on a personal level. She carried herself with an authority that suggested significant responsibility, yet she had been approachable and easy to work with. Marcus reminded himself to maintain professional boundaries. Military regulations were clear about appropriate relationships between service members, and he had always been careful to keep personal and professional interactions separate. Still, there was no harm in appreciating a colleague's competence and professionalism. The day ended with an after-action briefing that reviewed the day's activities and prepared for the following day's operations. Rodriguez was pleased with Marcus's performance and his handling of the communication equipment issue. "Good work today," Rodriguez said as the office prepared to close. "You're settling in faster than most people do. Keep this up, and you'll be a valuable part of the team." Walking back to his quarters that evening, Marcus reflected on his first full day of work at Fort Braxton. The pace was intense and the coordination requirements were complex, but he felt confident in his ability to handle the challenges. The people he was working with seemed competent and professional, and he was looking forward to building effective working relationships. He was particularly looking forward to working with Peterson again. Their collaboration on tomorrow's communication planning had been efficient and productive, and he hoped there would be more opportunities to work together on complex coordination projects. The morning of the joint exercise dawned clear and cool, with no sign of the thunderstorms that had been predicted the night before. Marcus arrived at the coordination office even earlier than usual, wanting to ensure that all communication equipment was properly positioned before the exercise began. The joint exercise was the most complex training event Marcus had encountered since arriving at Fort Braxton. 3 different brigade combat teams would be working together in a simulated combat scenario that covered thousands of acres of training area. Each unit had its own communication protocols and equipment preferences, making coordination a significant challenge. Rodriguez was already in the office when Marcus arrived, studying weather reports and making final adjustments to the day's plans. The absence of predicted storms simplified some aspects of the operation, but Rodriguez warned that weather conditions could change quickly. "The good news is we won't need the weather-resistant backup systems," Rodriguez said, pointing to the clear skies visible through the office windows. "The bad news is that clear weather means the exercise controllers might decide to add complications that they would have avoided in bad weather." Marcus understood the implication. Military training exercises were designed to challenge participants and test their ability to adapt to changing circumstances. Clear weather gave exercise controllers more options for introducing unexpected variables that would test the coordination systems. At 0645 hours, Marcus began his pre-exercise equipment checks. He contacted each communication site to verify that radios were functioning properly, that backup systems were ready, and that all personnel understood the communication protocols for the day. Everything appeared to be in order. Peterson arrived at the coordination office just as Marcus was completing his final checks. She was carrying a larger equipment bag than usual and had a radio clip to her uniform that crackled occasionally with status reports from various units. "Morning," she said, approaching Marcus's desk. "How are we looking for communication readiness?" Marcus consulted his checklist and computer displays. All primary systems are operational, backup equipment is positioned and tested, and everyone seems to understand the frequency assignments. We should be good to go. She nodded approvingly. Good. I've been monitoring radio traffic for the past hour, and all units are reporting ready status. The exercise controllers want to start exactly on time, so there's no margin for equipment problems. As they talked, Marcus noticed that other soldiers in the coordination office seemed to defer to Peterson's presence. When she spoke, people listened carefully, and, when she made suggestions, they were implemented quickly. It suggested someone with significant authority, though Marcus still hadn't seen any rank insignia that would explain her obvious influence. There is one thing I wanted to discuss, Peterson continued, lowering her voice slightly. Intelligence reports suggest the exercise controllers might simulate communication jamming at some point during the day. If that happens, we'll need to switch to backup frequencies and alternative communication methods. Marcus appreciated the heads up. Communication jamming scenarios were common in advanced military exercises, designed to test units' ability to maintain coordination when primary communication systems were compromised. Having advance warning allowed him to prepare contingency plans. I can have backup communication systems ready to activate if jamming starts, Marcus offered. How much advance notice do you think we'll have? Peterson shook her head. Probably none. The whole point of jamming scenarios is to test how quickly units can adapt to unexpected communication failures. We'll need to be ready to implement backup plans immediately. They spent several minutes reviewing alternative communication procedures and verifying that backup equipment was positioned correctly. Marcus was impressed by Peterson's thorough understanding of communication systems and her ability to think through complex contingency scenarios. At 0730 hours, the joint exercise officially began. Marcus monitored radio communications as hundreds of soldiers moved into their initial positions across the training area. The coordination office became a hub of activity, with status updates flowing in constantly and coordination personnel working to ensure that all units had what they needed. The exercise scenario involved a simulated peacekeeping mission where different brigade combat teams had to work together to secure a large area and protect civilian populations. It required close coordination between units with different capabilities and training backgrounds. Marcus found himself busier than he had been since arriving at Fort Braxton. Communication requests came in constantly, equipment problems needed immediate solutions, and coordination requirements changed as the exercise scenario evolved. It was exactly the kind of complex, fast-paced environment where his logistics background proved most valuable. Around 1030 hours, Peterson's prediction about communication jamming proved accurate. Radio communications across multiple frequencies suddenly filled with static and interference that made normal voice communication impossible. Marcus watched as communication indicators on his computer screen began showing system failures across the training area. Jamming scenario is active, Peterson announced to the coordination office. All units are switching to backup communication procedures. Marcus immediately began activating alternative communication systems that had been prepared for exactly this contingency. Backup radio frequencies, field telephone lines, and even messenger services were implemented to maintain coordination between different units. The next hour tested every aspect of the coordination systems at Fort Braxton. Without normal radio communications, units had to rely on more primitive methods to maintain contact with each other and with the coordination office. It was challenging work that required creativity and quick thinking. Marcus found himself working closely with Peterson throughout the communication emergency. She seemed to know exactly which backup systems would work best in different situations, and her suggestions consistently proved effective. When standard backup radios failed to penetrate the simulated jamming, she recommended using different antenna configurations that restored partial communication capability. How did you know that antenna adjustment would work? Marcus asked during a brief lull in the activity. Peterson smiled slightly. Experience. I've dealt with communication jamming in real-world situations, not just training exercises. Sometimes the theoretical solutions don't work, and you have to try things that aren't in the manual. Marcus filed that information away. Real-world experience with communication jamming suggested that Peterson had been deployed to combat zones where enemy forces actively tried to disrupt military communications. That kind of experience was valuable and relatively rare, even at a base like Fort Braxton. The jamming scenario lasted for another 2 hours before exercise controllers restored normal communication systems. During that time, Marcus and Peterson worked together to maintain coordination between units using whatever communication methods remained available. It was intensive, challenging work that required constant problem-solving and adaptation. When normal communications were restored, Marcus felt a sense of satisfaction at how well the coordination office had performed during the crisis. No units had been left without communication capability for more than a few minutes, and the exercise had continued without significant disruption. "Nice work," Peterson said, as they began shutting down the backup communication systems that were no longer needed. "You adapted to the jamming scenario faster than most people do on their first time through something like that." Marcus felt pleased with the compliment. "I had good guidance. Your suggestions about antenna configurations and backup frequencies made all the difference." As the afternoon progressed, the joint exercise continued with various tactical scenarios that tested different aspects of multi-unit coordination. Marcus handled equipment requests, communication requirements, and logistics support with increasing confidence. The complex pace of operations no longer seemed overwhelming. Around 1,500 hours, Marcus overheard a radio conversation that caught his attention. One of the exercise controllers was requesting a status update from Commander Peterson about communication system performance during the jamming scenario. Marcus paused in his work, wondering if he had heard correctly. The title commander suggested someone with significant rank and authority, but Peterson had never mentioned her rank or position during any of their interactions. Marcus had assumed she was a senior enlisted soldier or perhaps a junior officer. A few minutes later, Peterson appeared at his desk carrying several reports that needed to be filed with the coordination office. She seemed focused on completing the paperwork requirements that came with the end of major training exercises. "The exercise controllers want detailed reports on communication system performance," she explained, handing Marcus several forms. "They're particularly interested in how quickly we were able to restore coordination capability after the jamming started." Marcus accepted the forms and began reviewing them, but his mind was still processing what he had overheard on the radio. If Peterson was indeed a commander, it meant she held significant rank and authority that went far beyond what he had assumed. "Peterson," Marcus said carefully, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but what exactly is your position here at Fort Braxton? I've been assuming you work in communication coordination, but some of the radio traffic suggests you might have broader responsibilities." Peterson looked at him for a moment before responding. "I coordinate communication systems for complex training exercises and operational planning." "Why do you ask?" Her answer was technically accurate but didn't really address Marcus's question about her rank or position in the military hierarchy. Marcus decided not to press the issue, but he filed away his growing suspicion that Peterson's role at Fort Braxton was more significant than she had indicated. The joint exercise concluded at 1,700 hours with an after-action review that brought together representatives from all participating units. Marcus attended the review as part of the coordination office team, taking notes on lessons learned and areas for improvement. During the review, Marcus paid careful attention to how other participants interacted with Peterson. Several senior officers addressed her with obvious respect, and her comments during the discussion were given significant weight. It was becoming clear that Peterson held a position of considerable authority. The review covered all aspects of the exercise, from tactical performance to logistics coordination to communication system effectiveness. Peterson provided a detailed briefing on communication performance that demonstrated extensive knowledge of both technical systems and operational requirements. Communication coordination during the jamming scenario exceeded expectations, Peterson reported to the assembled officers. Backup systems were activated quickly, alternative communication methods proved effective, and no units experienced significant coordination problems. Marcus felt proud that his work had contributed to the success Peterson was describing. The coordination office had performed well under challenging circumstances, and his logistics background had helped ensure that backup systems were ready when needed. After the review ended, Marcus began cleaning up his workspace and preparing end-of-day reports. The joint exercise had been demanding but successful, and he felt confident about his growing familiarity with Fort Braxton's operations. Peterson stopped by his desk one final time before leaving for the day. "Thanks for your work today." The coordination during the jamming scenario was particularly impressive for someone who hasn't been here very long. "Thank you," Marcus replied. "I enjoyed working on something that complex. It's the kind of challenge that makes the job interesting." Peterson nodded. "There'll be plenty more opportunities like this. Fort Braxton runs major exercises regularly, and they're always looking for people who can handle complex coordination requirements." As she prepared to leave, Marcus decided to take a chance on getting more information about her role. "Will you be coordinating communication for the next major exercise?" "Probably," Peterson said. "My responsibilities include oversight of communication systems for most major training events. It's part of making sure everything runs smoothly." The word oversight suggested supervisory authority that went beyond hands-on coordination work. Marcus was becoming increasingly certain that Peterson held a leadership position that she hadn't fully disclosed during their interactions. After Peterson left, Marcus finished his end-of-day reports and began shutting down his computer systems. Rodriguez appeared at his desk as he was completing the final paperwork. "Good work today, Chen," Rodriguez said. "I heard positive feedback about your performance during the jamming scenario. Peterson was particularly complimentary about your adaptability." "She's very knowledgeable," Marcus replied. "Her guidance during the communication crisis made all the difference." "What exactly is her position here?" "I get the impression she has broader responsibilities than I initially realized." Rodriguez paused for a moment before answering. "Peterson works closely with our office on communication coordination, but her primary responsibilities extend beyond what we handle here. Let's just say she's someone whose opinion carries significant weight around the base." Marcus understood that Rodriguez was being diplomatically vague about Peterson's exact role. Military protocol often required discretion about discussing other personnel's positions and responsibilities, especially when dealing with sensitive or classified information. Walking back to his quarters that evening, Marcus reflected on the day's events. The joint exercise had been the most challenging coordination work he had encountered since arriving at Fort Braxton, but it had also been deeply satisfying. Working with Peterson had been particularly rewarding, both professionally and personally. There was something intriguing about Peterson that went beyond her obvious competence and professionalism. She carried herself with an authority that suggested significant responsibility, yet she remained approachable and easy to work with. Marcus found himself looking forward to future opportunities to collaborate with her. As he prepared for bed that night, Marcus thought about his growing suspicion that Peterson's role at Fort Braxton was more important than she had indicated. The evidence was subtle but consistent: the deference other soldiers showed her, the way senior officers listened to her input, and the radio reference to Commander Peterson that he was now certain he had heard correctly. Marcus decided that he would pay closer attention to these details in future interactions. Understanding the military hierarchy and knowing who held what positions was important for effective coordination work. If Peterson was indeed a senior officer, it would explain many of the things he had observed about her authority and influence. The mystery would have to wait for another day. For now, Marcus was satisfied with his performance during his first major exercise at Fort Braxton and optimistic about his future at one of the Army's premier installations. 3 weeks had passed since the joint exercise, and Marcus had settled into a comfortable routine at Fort Braxton. His reputation for effective coordination had grown, and he found himself assigned to increasingly complex projects that required his logistics expertise. The work was challenging and rewarding, exactly what he had hoped for when requesting the transfer. His working relationship with Peterson had continued to develop during those 3 weeks. They collaborated regularly on communication planning for various training exercises, and Marcus had come to appreciate both her technical knowledge and her strategic thinking. She had a way of anticipating problems before they occurred and developing solutions that seemed obvious only in retrospect. Despite their frequent professional interactions, Marcus still knew relatively little about Peterson's background or exact position at Fort Braxton. She remained friendly but professionally distant, sharing technical information freely while revealing little about her personal life or military career. Marcus had learned to respect those boundaries while continuing to wonder about the mystery surrounding her rank and responsibilities. On a Thursday morning in late spring, Marcus arrived at the coordination office to find Rodriguez reviewing reports with an expression that suggested significant developments were ahead. The overnight activity summary showed unusual movement of personnel and equipment, indicating that something major was being planned.
"What's the situation?" Marcus asked, settling in at his workstation and logging into the computer systems.
Rodriguez looked up from his reports.
"We've got a major inspection coming.
The division commander is bringing a team of senior officers through next week to evaluate training readiness and operational capabilities.
Everything needs to be perfect." Marcus understood the implications immediately. Division-level inspections were serious events that could affect the careers of everyone involved. Units that performed well during these evaluations received recognition and resources. Units that performed poorly faced increased scrutiny and potential leadership changes. "What's our role in the inspection?"
Marcus asked, already thinking through the coordination requirements that would be involved.
"We'll be responsible for ensuring that all demonstration exercises run flawlessly," Rodriguez explained. "Communication systems, equipment coordination, logistics support, everything has to work perfectly. The inspectors will be looking for any signs of problems or inefficiency."
Over the next hour, Rodriguez outlined the inspection schedule and the various demonstration exercises that would be conducted for the visiting senior officers. The scope was impressive, involving multiple units and complex scenarios designed to showcase the base's training capabilities and operational readiness. Marcus was assigned primary responsibility for coordinating communication systems during the inspection demonstrations. It was a significant responsibility that reflected the confidence his supervisors had developed in his abilities, but it also meant that any communication failures would reflect directly on his performance. Around 1,000 hours, Peterson arrived at the coordination office carrying a thick folder of documentation and wearing the focused expression that Marcus had learned to associate with particularly important projects. She approached his desk with the purposeful stride that suggested urgent business. "I need to discuss communication requirements for next week's inspection," she said, setting her folder down on his desk. "The scenarios are more complex than anything we've run before, and there's zero tolerance for equipment failures or coordination problems."
Marcus opened his notebook and prepared to take detailed notes. "What's different about these scenarios compared to our regular exercises?"
Peterson opened her folder and spread several maps and technical diagrams across his desk. Multiple frequency bands, encrypted communications, and coordination between units that normally don't work together. Plus, we'll have senior officers monitoring our radio traffic, so everything needs to be perfectly executed. They spent the next 2 hours going through detailed technical requirements, backup procedures, and contingency plans for various potential problems. Marcus was impressed by the thoroughness of Peterson's preparation and her attention to every possible detail that could affect communication effectiveness. "You've really thought through every angle," Marcus commented as they reviewed the backup communication procedures.
"This level of planning should prevent any significant problems during the actual demonstrations." Peterson looked up from the technical diagrams. "When division commanders are watching, there are no small problems.
Any failure becomes a major issue that reflects on everyone involved. I've seen careers damaged by equipment failures during high-level inspections." Her comment reinforced Marcus's growing suspicion that Peterson had extensive experience with senior-level military operations. The way she talked about division commanders and career implications suggested someone who operated at levels where those considerations were routine rather than exceptional. As they continued their planning session, Marcus noticed that other personnel in the coordination office frequently approached Peterson for guidance on various aspects of the inspection preparation. She provided detailed answers to technical questions and made decisions about resource allocation with the confidence of someone accustomed to command authority. Around 1230 hours, a young lieutenant entered the coordination office and approached Peterson's location at Marcus's desk. The officer appeared nervous and was carrying several folders that suggested official business. "Ma'am," the lieutenant said, addressing Peterson with obvious respect, "Colonel Harrison needs to review the final communication plan before he briefs the division commander this afternoon. He asked me to request your presence at the 1400 hours planning meeting." Peterson nodded and began gathering her materials. "Tell the colonel I'll be there. And make sure he has copies of the frequency allocation charts and the backup communication procedures." Marcus watched the exchange with growing curiosity. The lieutenant's formal manner of address and Peterson's casual reference to providing information to Colonel Harrison suggested a level of authority that went far beyond what Marcus had assumed. After the lieutenant departed, Marcus decided to address the question that had been building in his mind for weeks. "Peterson, I hope you don't mind me asking, but what exactly is your rank? I've been working with you for weeks, and I still don't know how I should properly address you." Peterson paused in organizing her materials and looked at Marcus with an expression that seemed to be weighing how to respond. "You've been addressing me appropriately. In the coordination office, we tend to focus more on getting work done than on formal protocol." Her answer was diplomatic but didn't actually address his question. Marcus decided to be more direct. "I heard someone refer to you as Commander Peterson during the joint exercise, and the lieutenant just addressed you as ma'am. Are you an officer?" Peterson was quiet for a moment, and Marcus could see her making a decision about how much information to share. "Yes, I'm an officer. I try to keep interactions in the coordination office focused on the work rather than on rank differences." Marcus felt a surge of embarrassment and concern. If Peterson was an officer, his casual manner of interaction over the past few weeks had been inappropriate according to military protocol. He should have been more formal, more respectful of the rank difference between them. "I apologize," Marcus said quickly. "I should have realized and been more formal in my communications." "What's your actual rank?" Peterson shook her head. "You haven't done anything wrong. I prefer working relationships that focus on getting things done rather than on protocol requirements. But, since you asked directly, I'm a lieutenant colonel." Marcus felt his world shift slightly. Lieutenant colonel was a senior field grade officer rank, indicating someone with significant command authority and responsibility. Peterson wasn't just an officer, she was a senior leader who outranked him by several levels. "Lieutenant colonel," Marcus repeated, trying to process this information. "I had no idea. I've been treating you like a peer for weeks. And it's been more effective that way," Peterson replied. "When people get focused on rank differences, they sometimes stop thinking critically about problems and solutions. I get better work from coordination personnel when they feel comfortable sharing ideas and asking questions." Marcus understood her point, but he also realized that his assumptions about their relationship had been completely wrong. Every casual conversation, every professional disagreement, every moment when he had offered suggestions or corrections had been interactions between a staff sergeant and a lieutenant colonel. "Should I have been addressing you differently?" Marcus asked, still processing the implications of this revelation. "You can call me Colonel Peterson in formal settings," she replied. "In working sessions like this, Peterson is fine. The important thing is focusing on getting the mission accomplished effectively." As Peterson gathered her materials and prepared to leave for the planning meeting with Colonel Harrison, Marcus tried to reconcile this new information with everything he had observed about her over the past few weeks. Her authority, her influence, and the deference other soldiers showed her all made perfect sense now. "One more question," Marcus said as she prepared to leave. "What are your actual responsibilities here at Fort Braxton? Beyond communication coordination, I mean." Peterson paused at the edge of his desk. "I'm the executive officer for the 3rd Brigade Combat Team. Communication coordination is one of my responsibilities, but I also handle operational planning, training oversight, and liaison with higher headquarters." Executive officer of a brigade combat team was a major leadership position, typically involving responsibility for thousands of soldiers and millions of dollars worth of equipment. Marcus realized that he had been working directly with one of the senior leaders at Fort Braxton without knowing it. After Peterson departed for her meeting, Marcus sat at his desk trying to process this new understanding of their relationship. He felt embarrassed about his casual behavior, but also impressed that a senior officer would take the time to work directly with coordination personnel on technical details. Rodriguez approached his desk about an hour later, carrying a cup of coffee and wearing an amused expression.
"I heard you finally figured out who Peterson really is. Why didn't anyone tell me?" Marcus asked. "I've been treating a lieutenant colonel like a peer for weeks." Rodriguez chuckled. "She prefers it that way.
Colonel Peterson believes in hands-on leadership and direct communication with the people doing the work.
She gets better results by focusing on problem solving rather than protocol."
Marcus thought about his interactions with Peterson and realized that her approach had indeed been effective. He had felt comfortable sharing ideas and asking questions precisely because he hadn't felt intimidated by rank differences.
"Is that why she doesn't wear visible rank insignia when she's working in the coordination office?" Marcus asked.
"Exactly," Rodriguez confirmed. "She learned early in her career that some people stop thinking when they see senior officer rank. By keeping the focus on the work, she gets more honest feedback and better solutions to problems." The afternoon passed quickly as Marcus continued his preparation for the upcoming inspection. Knowing Peterson's actual rank and position gave him a better understanding of the importance placed on flawless coordination during the demonstration exercises. As the brigade executive officer, her reputation would be directly affected by the performance of every system under her oversight. Around 1,630 hours, Peterson returned from her planning meeting with Colonel Harrison. She approached Marcus's desk carrying additional documentation and wearing the satisfied expression that suggested a productive meeting. "The colonel approved our communication plan," she reported. "He was particularly impressed with the backup procedures and contingency planning. The division commander's inspection team will be looking specifically at our ability to maintain coordination under stress." Marcus felt proud that his work had contributed to plans that received Colonel Harrison's approval, but he also felt nervous about the increased scrutiny that would come with the inspection. Working with Peterson when he thought she was a peer had been one thing, knowing she was a lieutenant colonel added pressure to perform at the highest level.
"Are there any changes to the technical requirements based on the planning meeting?" Marcus asked, reviewing his notes from their earlier session.
"One addition," Peterson replied, pointing to a specific section of the exercise timeline. "The inspectors want to see how quickly we can reconfigure communication systems when priorities change during an operation.
We'll need to demonstrate switching between different frequency plans without disrupting ongoing coordination."
They spent another hour refining the technical procedures for the new requirement, with Marcus taking detailed notes and asking clarifying questions.
Despite knowing Peterson's actual rank, he found that their working relationship remained fundamentally unchanged.
She continued to value his input and expertise, and he continued to feel comfortable raising technical concerns. As the day ended, Marcus reflected on how much his understanding had changed.
Peterson's leadership style was impressive precisely because it focused on results rather than hierarchy.
She had earned respect through competence and effective leadership rather than through intimidation or formal authority. Walking back to his quarters that evening, Marcus thought about the upcoming inspection and his role in ensuring its success. Working directly with the brigade executive officer was both an honor and a responsibility that he didn't take lightly. The coordination systems he managed would be evaluated by some of the Army's senior leaders. More importantly, Marcus realized that he had learned something valuable about leadership from his interactions with Peterson. Effective leaders focused on mission accomplishment and took care of their people, regardless of rank differences. The best officers led by example and earned respect through their actions rather than demanding it through their position. The upcoming inspection would test everything Marcus had learned about coordination and logistics at Fort Braxton. It would also be his opportunity to demonstrate that Peterson's confidence in his abilities was well placed. He was determined to ensure that the communication systems performed flawlessly and that the coordination office contributed to a successful evaluation. As he prepared for bed that night, Marcus smiled at the memory of his first impression of Peterson as just another soldier. Her leadership style had been so effective that he had focused entirely on her competence and professionalism rather than on her rank or position. It was a reminder that the best military leaders were defined by their actions and achievements rather than by the insignia on their uniforms. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the inspection preparation continued, but Marcus felt confident in his ability to meet those challenges. Working with Colonel Peterson had taught him valuable lessons about both technical coordination and effective leadership that would serve him well throughout his military career.